Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I'm going to be bringing you guys an update on the state of the game. Now, it's something I've been pretty radio silent about. However, now that GGG has tripled down on their vision once more, back to 3.15, I decided that it was time for me to actually talk about it because there's a good chance that I'll be basically quitting PoE for the 3.19 Lake of Kalandra League if there's nothing that comes into the next few days which shows any sort of actual goodwill from GGG, because right now our only hope is that investors actually give them a call and make some changes happen, because these sort of posts are disgusting. At best, it's literally just them spitting in our face, and for those who might not realize it, I'll go ahead and basically give you a breakdown of what this means. So they're saying that they've massively increased number of rarity bonus. Now, first off, no one gives a crap about that. Most unique items in this game are absolutely worthless, and rare items are filtered out because nobody wants to see them. So rarity bonuses are completely useless. Massively increased the rarity, again, completely useless. We're just going to get more Alk shards, which actually might be useful because sustaining alts is essentially impossible this league. Globally increase of drop rates of uniques by 33%. Again, same sort of situation. Cool, we might be able to sustain our alks when running maps, but that's about it. And we've globally increased the price rate of currency items by 25%. Now, you look at these numbers and you might be like, okay, this is pretty good. Well, here's the problem. When they say that they've increased it by 25%, they're talking about the current values, which means that if you were doing a map and if you were getting 4 alchemies every 5 maps, right? Now you're going to be getting 5 alchemies every 5 maps. It doesn't make any real difference. And the reason is that, yes, these numbers look great, right? But this is manipulation. This is trying to essentially make us believe something by just giving us numbers that are arbitrary and that have absolutely no meaning whatsoever. There's nothing real here. There's nothing concrete. The estimation on the absolute high end of juicing maps, and I know that this is not going to be something that most players would ever do, but the estimation is that the reduction of loot is roughly 90 to 95%. This is on the high end. So of course, if you're doing like Alk and Go maps, it's probably more like a 50 or 60% nerf, which is probably what I would consider to be the case, you know, I've been playing this game for quite some time now, and my drops in maps feel like they're basically half in Alk and Go maps than what they used to be. Okay, so when they're saying that they're increasing this by 25%, if we are taking what used to be 100% and they reduced it by 90%, and I'm being generous here, that means that we had 10% left. Now, if they're actually going to buff this by 25%, it means that in reality, we're only getting 12.5% of what we used to have. It's laughable. It doesn't make any change. It doesn't. This is literally PR, right? It's PR at best. It's manipulation at worst, and it's just complete bullshit. And I'm going to call it out for what it is. This entire post is complete bullshit. Okay, now let's talk about why that is, right? Let's talk about why you, as a maybe potentially casual player, as a newer player, as somebody who wasn't expected to be doing these 100% daily super juiced map, or to craft perfect mirror tier items, right? Because of the harvest changes, you might be like, none of this affects me, man. I don't care. Well, here's the thing. Path of Exile is a trickle-down economy. What that means is that the people at the top are supplying the people under them, which are supplying the people under them, which are supplying the people under them, right? The people like myself who used to make perfect mirror tier items, as we are trying to make these perfect mirror tier items, we are going to make things that we consider failures. Not good enough, but still quite good. Now, these items that are not good enough, but still quite good, are going to be sold to the people under us. And for those people, it's going to be upgrades. And because we are trying to craft the absolute best item, we sell those for much cheaper than what we probably could sell them otherwise, right? Because the idea is to just basically keep on going until we get the absolute best. Now, the people buying our items, right, which are good enough but not quite perfect, are going to be able to get these as upgrades, which allows them to sell whatever item they're using to the people under them. And what they do is when they get an upgrade, they sell their current gear for less than it's worth. Right? Now, you can see that this trickles down to the absolute lowest, players who are basically only entering maps. And what this does is that the price constantly goes down. So the perfect items are always going to be essentially the ceiling, but after that, the good enough but not quite perfect item is going to keep going down in price as time goes on, because there's more and more supply as people are trying to craft the absolute best, and there's less people who need these upgrades, so the price is going to go down. Now, because people are buying these upgrades and selling theirs, and because there's a lot of people doing that, the price of those items, which may be considered, say, mediocre, is also going to go down. So the people who are under those can buy upgrades for cheaper. And it only keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And the only thing that actually stays expensive is the very top. So you'll have the mirror tier item, which is like a mirror plus a fee. And then the item, which is potentially only 10% or 15% worse, is going to be 1/4 of the price of that, or maybe even 1/5. And then the item which is 10% worse than that is going to be 1/4 or 1/5 of that price, right? So it becomes very, very cheap for people to get upgrades which are actually quite significant. Now, with the current changes to harvest, with the actual removal of recombinators and all of that the changes to crafting, essentially what happens is this trickle down economy goes away, right? What used to be considered mediocre item is now what we actually consider good items, and what used to be considered good items are now going to be the new mirror tier item, and the actual mirror tier item which we used to consider mirror tier are no longer going to exist. I can almost guarantee you that, outside of a few lucky people who might actually get crazy luck, most of those items will never exist again in the current state of the patch, right, of crafting. Now, this means that somebody who used to be able to buy a mediocre item from someone who had bought an upgrade and who was selling it for relatively cheap is now no longer going to be able to get access to these items. They're going to be stuck with the absolute bare bone items, the type of stuff that just drops on the ground. Life resistance, maybe a damage stats or something like that, right? Really basic, pretty trash tier stuff. And that's what they're going to be stuck with, because their upgrades are going to be so expensive. And forget about perfect items, right? Because those are just no longer going to exist. Now, you might be like, okay, well, I never really needed perfect items. And to that, I completely agree. You never needed a perfect, fully mirror tier character in order to be able to do any content in this game. That is just not the case. However, to the people like myself and to the veterans, to the no-lives, the people who play PoE, be it content creators or people who just, absolutely love min-maxing their character, these items give us something to look forward to, something to strive toward, a reason to log in every day and play 8 hours and make X amount of currency so that we can spend that trying to get upgrades for our character that we don't need but that we want, right? So, now that I've talked about this and explained why this is literally spitting in the face of the consumers, which is us, let's talk about player retention and why this league is going to die, like, fast, okay? So what I have here is the league charts. Now, to be fair, this is only the numbers on Steam, so it doesn't include the people playing the standalone. However, we can assume that this is the majority of players because GGG and Chris Wilson said that they topped 250,000 peak amount of players, and we can see the peak amount of players this league, Calandra League here, was 152,000 on Steam, which means that there was another 100,000 players not on Steam on the standalone client. So we can assume that this is actually a majority of players playing on Steam. More than half, right? Probably 60-70% of people are actually Steam players. So now that we look at this number here, what we are going to look at is the actual player retention per league. So we could see that the highest number was Archnemesis on Steam, and the reason for that is because it was the December League, which is now the January League. Essentially, it's the expansion league. It's not just a league, it's an expansion. This brought the new Atlas, it brought the new Eldritch bosses, it brought a ton of new stuff, right? The new Eldritch implicits, blah, blah, blah. We could see that it started at the highest point between Calandra, Sentinel, Archnemesis, and Expedition, which are the leagues I'm focusing on here. Despite the fact that it started at the highest number ever, it actually around around a month into the league, it actually had less players than any of the other leagues here. It had less players than Sentinel. It had less players, or it had just about as many players as Expedition, despite the fact that it started with a significantly larger amount of players, right? So why was retention so bad in a league which would have been supposed to be pretty good, right? It was an expansion league. Well, now the reason why the player retention was so bad in Archnemesis, well, was because of Archnemesis. The league was basically non-existent, right? It wasn't a particularly rewarding league mechanic, and there was very little in terms of quality of life, in terms of being able to properly build your own monsters. So most people just kind of ignored the league mechanic. And while there was the new Atlas and while there's the new Eldritch bosses, there was nothing to really look forward to, as we had lost Harvest, right? Harvest crafting at that point, and realistically speaking, there was just little to strive for, because even the new Eldritch bosses were considered very, very easy. Okay, now that we looked at Archnemesis, which is, the highest peak, yet had some of the lowest retention a month into the league, we can actually go ahead and look at the next league, which is widely considered, well, before this league, as the worst league of all time, which is Expedition. Now, why was Expedition the worst league of all time? Well, first off, they basically gave a global nerf of about 30% to every single skill gem in the game, which was, a pretty big nerf. Then they nerfed movement abilities, so it felt like you had very slow characters, felt like you were walking through molasses. It just felt like you couldn't actually dodge out of the different mechanics because you had such a small amount of charges on your actual movement abilities. This made the game feel slow, and that's what players don't like. Players, like PoE players, have been almost drilled to play the game in an efficient and fast way, and that's not something that we came up with. That's the way that GGG has basically trained us to play and trained us to enjoy the game, by giving us these mechanics which constantly basically were timed mechanics, which meant that we had to get faster character, stronger character in order to be rewarded, right? And it all started with basically Legion, right? Legion was pretty much the first mechanic which was timed. You would click the thing and you had a certain amount of time to clear the whole thing, otherwise you would lose out on loot. Blight was sort of the same situation. You had to get enough damage, enough speed on your character and all that to be able to clear the Blight, otherwise you wouldn't be rewarded, right? So then there was a Delirium. The fog moved. If you didn't move fast enough, you wouldn't be able to actually get your rewards. So they've been training us to actually be fast and efficient players, and they've been training us to enjoy the game in that regards. So when they nerfed like all the movement abilities by such a large amount, I think it was like half the charges on our flame dashes and all that, it was a pretty big deal. Not only that, it was also the change to flasks that made the game completely unplayable. It felt like you had never had any flash charges, even in relatively juiced maps, and it just felt bad. Which is well explained by the fact that, as you can see, it had the worst player numbers ever. Now, it did start with a pretty big disadvantage. As you can see, now this league, Expedition, was like a year ago, so the game was smaller back then. So it started with a significant disadvantage, but looking at the actual player retention, it was horrible. It was very, very bad. Okay, now let's go ahead and have a look at Sentinel League. Now, Sentinel League, actually, because it was coming off of Archnemesis, which a lot of people did not enjoy, and it had a pretty bad player retention in terms of percentages, Sentinel was basically started with a little bit of a disadvantage, right? It started with only 131,000 players, despite Archnemesis starting with 159,000 players. So there's a lot less players actually starting the league. But the funny thing is that if you look around 20 to 30 days into the league, it actually has the best player retention numbers pretty much ever, including a league which started with 27, almost 28,000 extra players. It still had more player retention than any other league. Now, why was Sentinel retention so good? Well, simply put, there is new endgame and aspiring content, such as the Uber bosses, right? A reason to actually push your character in terms of investment, which gave you a reason to farm currency to be able to reach those levels of investment. And the second reason was because of recombinators. Recombinators gave a reason for people to play because they had, if you will, even though it was somewhat gambling, there was a science to it, and you could basically figure out the pathing to getting a specific upgrade on your character. So as long as you played the game enough and you made enough currency, you could actually get to the point where you'd have whatever item that you could essentially ever imagine, which, well, as we can see from the player retention, is exactly what players want, right? The players want to have a way to craft the items that they want. They want to have something to look forward to. They want to have aspiring content. Despite the fact that it started with a significant disadvantage in players, it has the best player retention number ever, right? And it's not because of the Sentinel League itself. The Sentinel League was fun, but it wasn't game-changing, right? Yes, it brought some different playstyles, and it was available to everybody, either people who were boss rushing and then using Apex Sentinels to buff up their bosses so the bosses in the maps were more rewarding, or people who were juicing maps and then using their red Sentinel to juice even more, or to the people who were glacier farming with the blue Sentinel and basically getting the entirety of the map, popping their Sentinel, blowing everything up, and just leaving, right? There was something for everybody, for each playstyle, and everybody was rewarded, and the actual trickle-down mechanic was the highest it's ever been, because people like myself who were aiming to craft these absolute mirror tier items, whenever we would craft something that was slightly less than mirror tier, we were selling it off at an absolute bargain, because all we wanted to do was keep trying to go for the absolute best, which means that this economy kept trickling down to, of course, the point where the more casual players, the people who don't progress anywhere near as fast, were able to get upgrades for very, very reasonable prices. Something that right now is completely just out of the gameplay loop, if you will. And that's not just that. It's also the trickle down of things like scarabs and consumables, right? The people who are doing, for example, 100% Delhi scarab maps, right? Last league, they were coming out on maps with significant rewards, which made it worth it to actually do these maps so that they could sell these scarabs and whatnot for, you know, actual decent prices and relatively affordable prices for most players. So that even if you weren't a complete no-life, you were able to throw in some rusted or some polished scarabs on your maps, and it didn't feel like you were going out of your way in terms of investment and going broke, right? Now, because of the nerf, it's not even worth it, profitably speaking. It's not even profitable to actually giga juice your maps to make that a thing, so you have to put very minimal juice in order to turn a profit, which means that these consumables are now more expensive. Don't believe me? Look at the price of Expedition Scarabs. At the same time lastly, they were about 2C, and now they're like 6C, right? For the same exact scarab. Still better than the 12C on the map device, which I don't know who came up with, but great idea, GGG. 12C for an expedition that can be changed for just a simple rusted scarab with absolutely no other upside. Anyways, so now let's look at player retention from two of the worst leagues ever. So we have Calandra League, which is this league, and we have Expedition, which is regarded as the worst league of all time. Now, looking at it 5 days into the league, which is basically right now, we've almost lost half of the players. This is nearly 10% of players which are leaving the game every single day since the start of the league. And I don't see this getting any better. Matter of fact, it might actually get worse because GGG keeps doubling down and tripling down on what they consider their vision, right? Now, once this number reaches around 20 to 30%, which I'm actually expecting to be relatively soon, if nothing actually changes, because people are absolutely fed up with Archnemesis rares just absolutely destroying their characters or being one-shotted, and of course, not being able to actually see any sort of upgrade path to their character that makes any sense, I'm expecting this number to keep dropping and dropping and dropping. Which is going to lead to the league dying. And the thing about a league, when it starts dying, it dies fast, right? Because the less amount of people are playing, the less you can sell the items that you're actually making or that you're earning or that you're crafting or whatever it is. And the more the inflation comes into and the prices basically just start dropping like crazy. So there's no reason to really play, and people feel like they're basically just wasting their time. So they quit, which means that more people get into the same sort of situation, feel the same way, so that they quit. And then the absolute juicers, who typically would play the league for the entirety of the league and just constantly go for min-maxing, they see no upgrade path to their character because of, you know, harvest being removed, divines being the new currency, and divining rares being gone from harvest means that they'd have to spend hundreds of divines just to divine an item to make it considered perfect. It, you know, is just not something that's actually feasible, and most of the juicers are already leaving in troves. So I don't think this league is going to do very well. Personally, I think that the absolute best case scenario is that every single person who bought a ticket to ExileCon goes ahead and refunds it. Every person who bought a supporter pack this league goes ahead and refunds it. And maybe then GGG is going to get a call from their investors and they're actually going to realize that they are killing their own game. I don't know why. They're trying to turn PoE into basically Diablo 2, where you would farm Countess for 8 hours a day just to get that one high rune, which essentially gives you that one rune word. But the thing is, that one item in PoE, that one equivalent, is maybe a mirror, but that thing is not going to do anything because there's nothing to mirror. And of course, you're not going to drop a mirror in 8 hours anyways. So I don't understand what any of these changes are about. None of it makes sense. And the fact that they're doubling down and tripling down is just insulting. And personally, as someone who's a content creator, right? As basically the people who make this game actually alive, right? If it wasn't for the content creators, this game would be nowhere near where it is today in terms of growth. It would still be in its infancy stage because content creators are what make the game available and enjoyable for the vast majority of the players. Without us, this game dies. This game would have never lived in the first place. It would have just been a vision in Chris Wilson's head for his entire life, right? So if enough of us decide to just drop it and boycott the product, hopefully that, paired with a significant drop in actual revenue, is going to lead to some changes and giving the players what they want. Now, what the players want, we're not asking for that much. We're asking for GGG to actually make the game enjoyable, because GGG has been training us to enjoy the game in a certain way. And now they're basically just taking the game and flipping it upside down, and they expect us to enjoy this new version of the game, which is absolutely not what we fell in love with. Anyways, hopefully this didn't sound too negative and pessimist. I know that this is typically the type of content that I stay away from, but the reality is I love this game, and the reason why I'm upset about this is because I'm passionate about it and I want to see it succeed. Not just because it's my job, but because I actually truly love this game, right? So anyways, before I go, as always, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters, the 3 Alex, Skady, Bearded, Abe, Brandon, Gustavo, Tim, Domo Same, Desu, Miss, Gerald, Loopold, Mercury, Nate, Patrick, Rascola, Bert, Rocky, Solomon, The Great Master, Thomas Mass, as well as Maestro, Nailed, Ven, Bitizen, Nectarion, Noik, Xephion, Larsis. Huge thanks to you guys. You're essentially the people who make it possible for me to keep making this content, despite GGG, making these incredibly horrible decisions. We can only hope that they backtrack some of this stuff and that they stop trying to spit in our face and manipulating us by calling these actual buffs massive when we're, in the grand scheme of things, looking at about a 3% increase of what we currently have. It's actually laughable. All right, anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.